Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Mind interview series, where we interview real people just like you who are doing their best to be their best. And right now, I have a wonderful new friend of mine named Mark Mirra, who is CEO and co founder of Aligned Negotiations. Mark, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, super pumped to be here. Can't wait to chat.
Amazing. So, I'd like to warm us up. Instead of asking you a softball like, who are you or what do you do? Um, I want to start with what's the best piece of life advice that you've been living by in the last couple months?
Value. Life is about value and ROI. And I know
Talk to me.
Lissy and I just had a conversation offline about my rental challenges. But life's about value, and value comes in a ton of different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
So when most people look at value, they look at what they can quantify, which is usually dollars, price, cost, etc., which is a fair assessment of value because we can all conceptualize what a dollar's worth. But things are worth more than just price or cost. And the most important thing to life is looking at the total value of whatever you're discussing. So it could be time, it could be efficiency, it could be quality, it could be convenience, and all that. Yeah, rolls up into some level of dollar amount. But the most important thing you can look at in life is the total value of any interaction, whether it be an interpersonal interaction, a professional interaction, and everything in between. What's the actual value to this?
That's so great. Okay, so what is the most valuable thing that you have purchased in the last year?
Last year, most valuable thing. We got an EV, which has been super helpful for us
Ah,
because we get to just
yeah.
plug it in to the front door. We haven't been or needed to go to a gas station in like 6 months to charge our car.
Oh,
We charged it a couple times driving around, long distance drives, but that was about it. It's been one of the most convenient things possible is just plugging our car in, charging it, and going wherever we need to go.
amazing. And what is it, what value are you getting that makes it so
Ti-
special for you? Is it time?
time and convenience, right? Never have to
Yeah.
stop, never have to worry about smelly gas, although I love the smell of gas.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people love the smell of gas.
Writing that down.
Uh,
Yeah, no,
but
it's
but but time and convenience. Life is about time and convenience, and for us not have to worry about going anywhere to fuel up in 95% of our driving situations has been super easy and kind of nice. And the car drives itself. That's pretty cool too. Value.
love it. Love that the car drives itself. That's like a whole nother conversation, which maybe we'll dip into later. But for right now, I'd love you to go ahead, Mark, and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark Mirra, as you now know, I'm the co founder and CEO of Aligned, mid 30s, based in the New York, Connecticut area. My wife's name is Nick. I got a cat named Zelda and a dog named Barney, which means I'm a bit of a nerd. I love outside of the world of negotiation. I love video games and anime, things that take us outside of the earth and somewhere else, transporting us somewhere different, which is really nice. Got a baby on the way in a few weeks. So maybe when this is published, the baby will be here. Who knows? And to make a long story a little bit shorter, I've always been obsessed with pushing people outside their comfort zone. And I kind of have this sound bite on repeat in the back of my head for my entire life of just better, 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 better. How can you be better? How can you work with people that are better? And how can you help them break down barriers of discomfort and realize something greater than they thought they can do themselves? So, my childhood and high school and college, I was exposed to communication and presentation, conflict management, resolution, crisis. And it really shaped my perspective on what conflict could be and how conflict can be an incredibly healthy catalyst. But most people perceive conflict as really negative, uncomfortable, value eroding. When
Yeah.
I view conflict as something that you need in order to get to some sort of resolution collaboratively or cooperatively. So after graduating, had a bunch of different sales gigs. Finally found a negotiation consulting firm. It was an inside sales role. It was paying like nothing, but I was living at home. It didn't really matter all that much. So I figured I'll take a flyer on this. Became obsessed with it. Was there for 9 years, and then eventually got senior enough to see where the cracks are, but not empowered enough to fill them. Because when you're at a company that you started when you're 23, 24, they will only ever see you as the 23, 24 year old. So I had this moment in my life where I just didn't like the way I looked in the mirror at the end of the day. I didn't like the way I felt at the end of the day, because again, you really want to do an amazing job. You want to exceed expectations with clients. You want to redefine the way people look at conflict. And I wasn't empowered enough to do that. So I decided to take any job. So I just literally took any job for a year and built Aligned in the background. And fortunately, during that year, I just got nonstop phone calls of individuals and organizations that liked the way I presented negotiation. And then a year later, after my non-compete, non-solicit was up, we turned the lights on for Aligned, and it's been an incredible journey ever since. You have that moment of like, is it them or is it me? And I think at this point in our journey at Aligned, it's us. It's not necessarily them. And it's been an amazing story, redefining and rebranding something that most people find uncomfortable.
Yeah. Wow. I have six things that I'd like to touch on. So we'll just get started.
Yeah, go for it.
Very busy today. I love so much of what you said. One of the big things that really stuck out to me was this idea that like in a way you kind of like ran towards conflict. Like you see it as a great opportunity for people to kind of move through certain things in their life. Can you talk to me a little bit? I know you're an expert here about the psychology behind the discomfort within a negotiation.
Yeah. Let's think about animals in general, and then let's think about humans as an animal, an extension of another animal. We are very much pack animals. We like to be accepted by the pack. And this is from millions and millions years of data points. We've been able to create incredible societies and communities because we've been able to congregate together and learn what it's like to live in a society. Now, fast forward to the last, let's call it 15 to 20 years, age of the internet, tons of communication. All of a sudden, we're able to communicate with everybody all over the globe, all the time, nonstop, about everything. We
Yeah.
also know that loneliness, from a human dynamic standpoint, is crippling. There's tons of research on, especially males, as an example, feeling loneliness. We have studies now where people aren't having more than one close friend, which is really staggering. People are having romantic relationships much longer in life than they were much earlier in their lives. So loneliness is crippling for human beings. Now, translate that to the most conflict rich activity anyone will ever do in their life consistently. That's not physical pain, that's negotiation. Negotiation does not exist unless there's conflict. When we as humans show up when there's conflict, we have one of four different reactions. We have fight. I want to go to blows over this, or I want to be combative. We have flight, which is pretty obvious, fight or flight. Most people are familiar with that. I'll run away. I'll be conflict avoidant. But there are two other components of fight or flight, and that's freeze, deer in headlights. I lock up. I don't know what to do with this conflict. And then there's fawn, effectively appeasement, accommodation, etc. So every single human will do all four of these things: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But you're going to peak in one of these. So for me, from a human psychology standpoint, when I was 3, 4 years old, my parents got divorced. Very healthy divorce, very amicable divorce. They respected each other, they just didn't love each other anymore. And they felt the most important thing that they did was create me. So they were going to do everything they could to raise me in a collaborative and respectful way, which they did. And they followed through on. Both got remarried, et cetera. Very happy relationship, all good there. So I saw what good conflict looked like. I saw what non-isolating conflict looked like. So I wanted to be able to show people that conflict can be collaborative, and conflict can bring people closer together. And also, your strongest relationships are the ones in which you've been through conflict together, not the ones you walk on eggshells. Because if
Yeah.
it feels like if you introduce conflict and the eggshell breaks, then the relationship wasn't that strong to begin with. So I think it's incredibly important from a human psychology standpoint for us to recognize that conflict is designed to be resolved. And the resolution could be both parties walking away, like my parents that got divorced. That was conflict that they resolved collaboratively by deciding they wanted to be apart. So I think humans by nature take things very personally. We're
Yeah.
afraid of being alone.
Hmm.
So why am I even going to bother with negotiation? Why am I going to even bother with conflict if I feel like in my gut the end result is me being isolated?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, what's so interesting and something that you said when we first met that really struck me is this idea that like everything is a negotiation.
Mm,
And what was coming up for me right there is like, so if we use the example of a divorce, an amicable divorce being, a negotiation where both parties walked away, agreeing, working through a conflict and agreeing on the same outcome. Um, what about those moments, again, whether we think about them as a negotiation or not, where people walk away and they're not in agreement about what the end outcome should be? Because I think that's a point of a negotiation, is get to a point where both parties, ideal, you get what you want, but I think both parties get what they want. What would you say about those negotiations that go awry?
mm. So not every negotiation needs to end in an agreement. I think we're naive to believe that everything can be negotiated to a mutually acceptable resolution.
Yeah.
Some negotiations just don't resolve themselves because the bargaining range or the ZOPA, the zone of potential agreement, whatever you want to call it, if there's no overlap, then there's no reason to continue down this path. So I'll,
Mm.
I'll give you the example of my current rent negotiation. There's a ton of reasons why we're not renewing our lease, mainly because of the significant water damage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when we think about the bargaining range overlap between what we're willing to pay and what our
Mhm.
leasing office is willing to accept, there's no overlap there.
Yeah.
We weren't willing to accept a rent increase due to all of the challenges that we faced with our rental,
Yeah.
and they weren't accepting anything lower than a rent increase. So they were emphatically going to increase the rent. We were going to emphatically not paying any more than we should be paying for our unit, given all the construction mishaps that we had over the last 90 to 120 days. So there's no overlap there. So instead of kicking and screaming and getting upset and getting pissed off, all the feelings that are natural that we have, there's no overlap. So if there's no overlap, we need to walk away from the deal, and that's perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable. Now, when you walk away, you want to be sure you walk away professionally and respectfully in most instances, but everyone wants that double middle fingers, let's walk out of the room moment in their life. They're usually unnecessary. Those are ego rich, narcissistic, and selfish tendencies that most people have, but man, are they cathartic.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just don't have overlap, and the quicker you identify that you don't have overlap between your interests, you should respectfully just walk away from the deal, and that's fine
Okay.
too.
But why do we have a hard time walking away? Like we talked about being,
Mm.
does it come down to wanting to be part of a pack? Like, is
Mm.
that why we have a hard time walking away?
I think there's multiple reasons why we have a hard time walking away. One, we don't know what our goals are, so we have a hard time
Yeah.
understanding what our goals are. And if we don't understand our goals, then we want to make sure we feel a certain way. And
Mm.
feelings are usually driven by ego. And once humans feel like their ego has been bruised, then we lash out and get combative. So, and there's plenty of examples of this today of egos
Yeah.
being bruised and people lashing out and being irrational. But there's also, thousands of data points over 100,000 years of humans when they don't get what they want, they tend to lash out and become egotistical and narcissistic and combative and name calling and all this sort of stuff. But if we are able to park our ego and we are able to be clear and assertive and nice until you shouldn't be nice anymore, in order to articulate your interests, in order to understand their interests, then it's a lot easier for you to identify if there's overlap and where it is, and if there's not overlap and when it might be more appropriate to walk away. And that comes down to how you show up and of course your goal setting, which is super important too.
Yeah. And that just brings up, I'm laughing. We define mental fitness as creating the right mindset to achieve your goals.
Mm,
And so this is where you and I get along really well, and the work that we do really overlaps in that, in so many ways, creating the right mindset um, is such a huge part of showing up to a negotiation. And so I think two things that I have for you, like one is I should have stepped back and had us define what a negotiation actually is,
mm.
which would be great. And then the second is, can you talk about mindset and how to set yourself up for a negotiation?
100%. So
Yeah.
let's take a step back to take a few steps forward. So let's define negotiation. When many people think about negotiation, they think about people transacting business, buying and selling stuff. And that is a example of negotiation, but it's not the only example of negotiation. Negotiation, 30,000 foot overview, is about controlling conflict, hopefully in a positive and constructive way, to align on terms between two or more parties. If conflict did not exist, disagreement did not exist, then there would be no need to negotiate. For example, when you go on Amazon or you go to Walmart or Target, there's no conflict over the price of Listerine. It's just that's the price, and you either buy it or you don't buy it. There's no negotiation there. There's no conflict that exists. There's no empowerment that exists for you to trade over the price of something at the grocery store. That being said, there's conflict all around us. There's conflict on who's going to walk the dog in the morning. There's conflict on buy side, sell side relationships between counterparties. There's conflict with me in the leasing office. There's conflict all around us. So when there's conflict, your goal is to identify the terms that separate us and be very clear on the terms that separate us: price, volume, delivery time, efficiency, relationships, payment terms, contract. These are the terms that separate us. Then we hopefully can align those interests, find the right combination of terms that gets us our agreement. So in its truest sense, it's about conflict and alignment on terms.
Love
And
it.
although you're going to be in like 100,000 of these in your life, personally, professionally, everything in between, they fall into 4 different buckets. And this is where you kind of get your mindset. There are 4 different types of negotiation scenarios you're going to be a part of. And in professional settings, you'll skew a little bit more to one direction. Personal settings, you'll kind of skew toward another direction. But the 4 types of negotiation are bargaining, trading, creating, and partnering. Those are 4 different types of situations you're going to be in. And we look at it through 2 lenses. We look at the core deal itself. We break down the core deal by the number of terms, a lot of complexity, a little complexity, the number of alternatives you have for you and them. Is it saturated, a few, or scarce? And then we look at the intent. Is my intent one-off, one time? Is my intent reoccurring? Or is my intent fully embedded in long-term? So we look at the core deal itself. But you can't look at the core deal itself in isolation. You also look at the precedent and the relationship that has either been set or that you want to nurture in the future. So that relationship, is it non-existent or combative? Is it professional? We like doing business with each other. Or is it fully trusting? I rely on you. You rely on me. We trust each other implicitly, not explicitly. So we look at all those different factors. And that'll, again, give you an indication of, are we bargaining here? Which means low complexity, tons of options, one-off intent, and the relationship can be non-existent all the way through trusting. Or are we partnering on this? Tons of complexity, very few if no alternatives, fully embedded type approach, and we have a professional, if not trusting, relationship with each other. Because that relationship acts like a bit like a multiplier, because that's the precedent that has been set. If you've been trusting each other, even if you think you're bargaining in this scenario, you'll end up trading because you're a little bit more trusting. You're open to sharing a little bit more about your interests. So you look at the core deal, you look at the relationship, and then you determine, are we bargaining, trading, creating, or partnering? That then gives us our mindset. So if we're bargaining, it's about being a hunter. I'm hunting for value. I'm hunting for leverage. I'm hunting for pressure. I'm hunting for opportunities for me to extract as much value as possible in my direction. That's because relationships don't matter all that much, because it's likely that you have no relationship and your intent is one-off. There's not a lot of complexity, and there are tons of options. So I can burn and turn, no big deal. So my mindset's to hunt. Now, trading and creating, that's where you're going to spend a lot of your professional life. Where bargaining and trading is where you spend most of your personal life, because our lives ain't that complex. Trading and creating is where you spend most of your professional life. Trading is about having the mindset of a trader or the mindset of a creator. And as the name suggests, trading negotiations, a little bit less complex, a little bit less long-term and focused, which means it's more finite value in front of us. And while there's enough complexity for us to get a bit creative here, The truth is, since there's finite value, my job is to showcase balance, but also shift that value in my favor because it's a finite pool of resources available. So, yeah, the best traders in the world can kind of group up all the value and then tilt it in their favor from a mindset perspective. The worst traders in the world will tilt value in their perspective off of a sub-optimized deal because they didn't foster any trust whatsoever. So trading is about balance and tilting the scales, and naturally creating is about creating value, challenging the status quo, challenging your walkaway points, challenging the precedent, sharing way more about your interests to identify where you're complementary, where you're in conflict, and use all those tools to grow value for both parties. Now, also, the truth is, even in creating negotiations, the contract's going to be worth more for one party than the other. But with the right mindset from both parties, both of those agreements should be significantly higher together than they would be if they were apart. That's a creating negotiated creators mindset. And lastly, partnering negotiations is about a deal maker's mindset. And yes, shaking hands and kissing babies is part of the gig because there are tons of internal departments, hidden agendas, third party agencies, regulatory concerns. Partnering negotiations happen incredibly rarely and
Mhm.
impact usually thousands, if not tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people's livelihoods. And it's not uncommon to have a creating negotiation as a creator be more collaborative than a partnering negotiation because the size, the scale, the scope, and the number of individuals when you're partnering is usually exponentially more challenging and larger than a creating negotiation would be. So they tend to take really long, and you have to have a true deal maker's mindset.
Super interesting. I'm laughing because the example that keeps coming up of all the negotiation I do with my job is the dishes with my fiance. Him and I have very different views of the way dishes need to be processed throughout a day. Both
Yeah, let me hear it.
cleanliness mindset, but both efficiency oriented, but very different pieces. So I'm smiling because I'm like the partnering bargaining mindset is really like where we need to be. I think we do a pretty good job, but it is very cool to hear you break down those four because yeah, when you put them through that lens, I'm constantly thinking about my relationships. I'm thinking about friendships. I'm thinking about the wedding I'm planning and not just with our vendors, but the family. I'm thinking about the negotiation I do, even just like it's crazy. I mean, I'm thinking about the negotiation I do even with myself, like when I'm thinking about working out in the afternoon when I'm tired. I
Yeah.
think it's really crazy because, yeah, when you talk about it in those terms, it's a lot different than negotiating a salary, negotiating a, job package or negotiating terms on, a business deal, which is, I think, how most people think about this. What would you say is the most surprising place that you've seen people use these negotiation skills?
Ooh, surprising place. See, they kind of just use it everywhere, so no place really surprises me anymore because when you think about negotiations, it's about balancing relationships, the process
Hmm.
you follow, and the goals that you set. So we've seen people use this with their kids. We've seen people use this uh, for their own personal relationships and personal deals, salary, spouse. We've seen people use these skills as marriage counseling for themselves, which I've definitely
Mm,
seen. We've definitely
yeah.
gone into businesses and done a bit of kind of relationship counseling unexpectedly because we help people articulate their interests and their constraints to each other and give them kind of a platform to discuss it in which they usually can't even allow themselves to be in a trusting enough environment to do that. So, the surprising areas, it feels like marriage counseling sometimes or business counseling sometimes, which can feel unrelated to negotiation. But at the end of the day, internal alignment is external power. And if you can't be internally aligned, well, then it's going to be hard for you to shift value in your favor in general. So, I guess that's the most surprising area people use some of these skills is just gaining internal alignment and giving people a platform to talk about their challenges in
Yeah.
a safe environment in a safe way.
Yeah. And I actually I want to hear a little bit more about you, speaking of challenges, and
Mm.
building this business. So, um, I think what's really cool is when I hear you speak, there's like a level of confidence and expertise that's just like unparalleled in this space. I
Oh,
mean, you are one of the foremost experts in negotiation, and it's very special to hear you teach because I love your examples and you do a great job clarifying these things. And I think that a lot of people listen to you and they're like, oh, he just like, he's gifted. Like he knows this stuff. Like he's clearly just the kind of guy who like gets it. And I just can't do conflict. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about like where you started in like dealing with conflict. Were you always like running towards it and comfortable with it? And now where you are when you face conflict?
mm. So let's talk about your own silent internal dialogue, right? Your SID here for a moment. Ever since I was little, I kind of have this own internal dialogue with myself. And I'll tell you a story when I must have been like 4 or 5 years old. So this was before kindergarten. I'm with my mom. She's a secretary, executive assistant at IBM. She didn't have any childcare for the day, so she would bring me in from time to time. Again, my parents got divorced before this point. And at one point, I kind of just wandered around on my own, and I grabbed some M&Ms, and I started handing out the M&Ms to the executives. But I was making sure I got paid for them. So I walked back to my mom's desk. I got like a wad full of change and dollar bills and fives, which was for an M&M, mind you. And no more M&Ms left. My mom's like, "What happened to your M&Ms?" I'm like, "Well, I sold them." She goes, "What do you mean?" So I've always been kind of this industrious person where even when I was little, I would play work. So I've always had this conversation with myself about, again, better, 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 better. Then as I kind of go through middle school and high school and college, I have these internal moments where I am wildly uncomfortable. I don't think I recognized how much anxiety I had until recently in life. God bless Wellbutrin. What a treat that is.
There we
And
go.
I think people can be honest about that too. But I have this internal struggle between my drive and my SID of doing better and wanting to help others and wanting to push myself and my own insecurities. And more often than not, my drive outweighs my insecurities, but it's almost like my drive drags my insecurities along with it because they never go away. And I'm uncomfortable right now, right? People just live in a level of discomfort that's okay, mind you, that you have. If you're not a little bit uncomfortable, I don't think you recognize that there's actual stakes. And if part of my brain says, the driving force that says do better, do better, do better, the force right behind it is don't be complacent, don't be complacent, don't be complacent. And again, it's incredibly challenging sometimes living with that voice that tells you to do better every single step of the way. And I think people need to recognize they can either live with that drive, or they don't have to live with that drive too. And that's also perfectly fine. Everyone has their own journey and their own story. And sometimes we compare ourselves to others way too much. But I think everyone needs to have a little bit of nervousness and anxiety when they go into a conflict rich situation, because if you didn't have any nervousness, I don't think you would appreciate the conflict and you wouldn't be prepared for it. And obviously, if you have too much nervousness and too much anxiety, that's going to then leapfrog any strategy that you have because now you no longer need to execute it. But that natural tension everyone has, I think, is incredibly healthy. We talk about the comfort zone, stretch zone, panic zone model. It's a bit like a
Yeah.
rubber band. And one of my challenges, I stay in my stretch zone way too long. I don't go back to comfort. So I've needed to learn over time that your comfort zone is an okay and safe place to be a good chunk of the time. And your stretch zone is where you stretch yourself and you challenge yourself, you trigger that drive, you trigger that do better, do better, do better. But then you have to go back to your comfort zone every now and then. And that's why it's important for me to, I don't know, hang out on the couch and play video games for a while, because that's my comfort zone. And it took me a really long time to find that balance. And like I said, Wellbutrin definitely helped, but so does and has meditation and mindfulness and fitness and eating the right things and whatnot. But I guess for a lot of people, they're scared to reconcile how they feel on the inside, because once you say it on the outside, then it becomes real. But if we don't face some of these insecurities that we have, or discomforts or anxieties that we have, then it's going to be harder for us to grow that comfort zone so it is
Totally.
wider. because we're effectively just lying to ourselves. And if we're lying to ourselves, then we're not going to be able to make any improvements. That was a bit of a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but I don't know. That's kind of how I
No,
see it.
it's exactly, it was funny because my next question was going to be how do you reconcile the better, better, better
Mm,
with today, like being okay with where you are today. And I think this is really like the crux of what we talk about when we talk about mental fitness, which I always laugh. Like I said, building the right mindset to achieve your goals. For most people, the ultimate goal is presence and
mm,
contentment, like being where you are and being cool with that. That's where like ease comes from. That's where this feeling of flow comes from that we talk a lot about. But I really loved what you said because you ended up answering my second question anyway, which is yes, you may have always had this propensity towards business and moving fast and being in your stretch zone. And you had to learn how to like pull back and balance that with like being a human and giving your brain a break and like really finding these different tools that I'm sure work at different times, which actually brings me to my next question, which is like, what are like 1 to 3 things you do when you do find you're either in your stretch zone too long, you're feeling that sense of anxiety, or just feeling like really stressed, and the SID um, isn't necessarily helping you?
mm. Yeah, video games help.
Well,
I'm not much of a like a wine or alcohol guy anymore, but definitely take a little bit of hit of the pen, relax, have a little THC, play some video games, and sometimes just turn it off because if I can't turn it off, then it just spins me up out of control. And this is kind of like this is a quote from the show Legion. Came out for like forever ago. At this point, it feels like forever ago. And the main character says, you know, the thing about mania, the thing about being manic is most people think of the depressed state, not the superhero state. So when I'm down on myself, sometimes what shows is the superhero state. I feel like I can conquer the world. And again, that's that balance of sometimes it's better to take a step back, decompress, take a few moments, relax, and then use that to leapfrog into the next kind of milestone or jump you wanted to be able to take in your life. But it's not a one size fits all approach. And I think everyone tries to find the quick or easy solution to a lot of things. Uh,
totally.
but the quick and easy solution will take you from like 80 to 90 or 90 to 100. It's the hard work that takes you from 0 to 80 that needs to be done and built and nurtured and taken care of and watered every week, every month. And it's when you don't tend to those things that they start to get overgrown. I think one of the most profound things one of my buddies said to me when I was younger, kind of dealing with all these things, he went to school for music therapy. And he said, you can rewire your brain. We were on a hike, actually, when we were talking about this. So it was a good, timely example. And he said, I want you to think of your brain like this hiking path. And the way you feel has been chopped and pounded and laid and maybe even asphalted over with line markings and lights because that's how you've wired your brain over so many weeks, months, years, decades. And if you wired it, let's call it improperly, where you have a lot of anxiety in social settings, you've retreated to your comfort zone for too long and not dove into your stretch, which makes the escargot just a little bit too weird on the menu. Um, you can rewire your brain. But in order to do that, you need to spend a lot of time with the machete chopping down the vines, clearing the paths, picking up and removing the rocks and the boulders. And while you're doing that, that road that you pounded and paved and lit needs time to overgrow. So you almost need to be able to recognize that there is a version of me that has been set in their ways for a really long time that I need to let go of.
That's big. That's really big. And I appreciate this is why we use the term fitness, where it's this practice that unfortunately you don't get to like go to yoga once and get fit. Like you are on a journey. And sometimes you're hitting the gym on a regular basis. And sometimes you're, light touch, walking around and that's enough and that's all you can handle. But to your point, to like create these new mindsets or mental patterns to show up differently, like it takes real work and it takes real time. And it's really cool that you were able to do that. I'm curious, who's that?
Miss Zelda, she's saying
Hi,
hello.
Zelda. So fun. Um, so a couple more questions left. We're going to rapid fire. So
Yeah,
a little
hit
bit
me with it.
shorter. This has been so good. One is, can you talk about a time where you wanted to quit, um, and you pushed just a little further and things turned out differently than you expected?
So yeah, I can actually use the example of the last firm I was with. I definitely wanted to quit in 2020. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't feel valued anymore. I felt like new leadership was pushing me to the side because I don't know, reasons. Again, they wanted to create their own team of leaders and I was on the outside looking in, et cetera, et cetera. But I decided to stick it out um, because I felt like there was still more for me to gain there, irrelevant of how I felt on the inside. So I took another role internally. I stretched myself. I challenged myself. And I'm fortunate because that extra year or two that I stayed there, I was able to meet a handful of new people. And when I quit, those are the people that were upset that I quit. And those are the
Wow.
people that reached out to me saying, we want to work with you. When can we do that? And that's how effectively Aligned was born. If I didn't stick it out for those extra couple of years, and again, reconcile how I felt on the inside so it didn't affect too much of how I felt on the outside, I would have left early. I wouldn't have made those relationships. And I don't know if Aligned would exist in the form that it exists right now without that, because those relationships were paramount for the first year or two of our growth, which has been massive for us as an organization. So yeah, that was a moment where I toughed it out. And although it didn't end positively there, it
Yeah.
ended up being a massive net benefit for me in other areas because I really challenged myself to learn negotiation. I really challenged myself to create something new and read the research papers and network and find inspiration outside of just the firm that I was at. And it really opened up my eyes. And I feel like it accelerated the growth of us as a business. And it really stretched me as a person to deal with that. And there were moments of which I was not happy with how I dealt with it, but I learned a lot. You either gain something in life or you learn something. And if you're not doing one of those two things, you're not really doing anything. Really, you're kind of going backwards. So I learned some. I might not have gained anything there. I certainly learned a lot in how I showed up those last 2 years.
Wow, that's big. And what's also cool is like what you're describing too is almost like the in that moment where potentially you wanted to quit, it's like the messy middle, and like it was only later once you figured out maybe what that gift was there to teach you. Was there ever a time where you should have quit sooner?
I don't know. I can't think of any like profound moment. I can use a cheap excuse, which was I busted up my shoulder, but I kept banging out those push-ups, and that didn't help. But that would be
Yeah.
trivial at the end of the day. I
That's
don't know.
not
I
I'm
feel like
By
no,
the
keep
way,
going.
that's not trivial at all. I mean, I was gonna say like this is one of those things where I think as like a high performer who's better, better, better is running in the
Yeah,
background. Um, I think we do that a lot. Like I think it's like if I just keep pushing, like everything will be okay. I mean, I ran through the cartilage in my knees for the same reason, and I wish that I had stopped sooner. Um, and it feels small, but it's like not that small. You know what I mean? Like what would I
it
have done
didn't.
if had
It
I
didn't feel small for the
no?
past few months. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. I
But
love that
I don't know.
example.
I got this question at another um, podcast I did a few weeks ago about like if you could do anything different in your life, would you do anything different? And my answer was really simple: no, because everything I've done has brought me here. And I've handled situations well and I've handled situations poorly, but I've either learned something or I've gained something along the way. And I don't spend a lot of time in the past. I don't spend a lot of time with regret because the only thing that's important is the present and the future. So if you just have the mindset of doing better, you kind of quickly forget what the past is, even if it stung a little bit. Um, but I really don't dwell on the past all that much. I really don't dwell on regret all that much. Make a decision and kind of live with that decision. You move forward with it, and you can change that decision over time. But you made it, and hopefully, you made it thinking about the value and thinking about the impact.
Wow, I love that. And I'm very similar too. I think it's a great way to be. Now, I'm curious if you were to give everyone on the call one piece of advice for a negotiation, regardless of what negotiation it was, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, so I'll take 2 seconds to say when we look at negotiation, we look at it across three dimensions, one of which will be pretty obvious. We talk about relationships a lot. So we look at relationships, we look at the repeatable process you follow, and then kind of your four types,
Interesting.
mindsets, etc. And then we look at your goals. I think the most important thing people need to think about are their goals. What is your absolute slam dunk definition of success? What are you totally cool with? And what requires justification? And then you take that frame, which we call it our goal zones. What's your goal? What are you authorizing? And what's your kind of why? Why are we doing this? And of course, below that's your walk away point. I'm going to walk away from the deal. Do that exercise across all of the different terms in your deal. Look at the price, look at the volume, look at the delivery time. Look at the lease agreement, look at the size of the place, look at the location, look at the amenities. Whatever the deal is, look at all of the different terms. And this is another thing people need to recognize is there's usually more terms to think about here. So you look at all of those terms, then you rank all of those terms top to bottom. Then you think about what's my goal? What do I feel good about? What am I going to require justification for? And where should I walk away? And when you rank them, you'd recognize that.
Wow. Okay. That's very, very interesting. And I love that, that most people don't probably know what their goals are, which makes complete sense. You know, you have a general sense of it, but I really appreciate kind of stepping through and getting really clear about those before walking in. That's big. Okay. What is your guilty pleasure?
I don't feel guilty about a lot of things. I kind of led with the anime and video games.
Yeah.
And I guess most people aren't overly proud of doing those things, but I don't know. I wear my guilty pleasures on my shoulder, I guess. I'm
All
the
right.
dude that sits on the airplane, shameless plug, in first class, which is cool because I travel way too much.
Oh,
With the video game console, playing a random game, sitting in the front of the plane. Like that's me. Watching an
I love it.
anime, not caring in the world. I cared a lot more about things in the past. And I wasn't as upfront about sharing these things in the past because I thought there was an optics around negotiation and what I was supposed to look like and how I was supposed to act. And I just don't care about that anymore at the end of the day. I think people shouldn't feel guilty about their pleasures if their pleasures make them happy. And if they're happy, I'm happy. Unless their pleasures
That's,
are I don't know, damaging someone else's good
yeah,
time.
I was going to say illegal, immoral, unethical. We don't want that.
Yeah,
I'm
we're not talking about
smiling, by
that.
the way,
Yeah.
because it's like, what a badass. Like I saw, we got a tattoo here,
Oh
by the
yeah,
way.
it's
That's
One
very
Piece, a
cool.
little anime. I
It's
put it
so
there.
great.
I have my watch is usually over it. So like professional Mark wears a watch, and like personal Mark shows people he loves anime.
That's so good. I'm gonna have to go look up the character better. I want to see.
Yeah, One
Um,
Piece. So again, shameless plug here on One Piece.
yeah.
This guy's been writing this comic for 25, 30 years.
Oh,
There's
wow.
1,200 episodes of the anime, still scorching hot fire.
Wow. That's incredible.
Best story ever told, just saying.
Whoa. Okay. Well, that's pretty bold. So we're going to put that in the show notes. But also, I want people to know, Mark, where they can find you. So if folks want to learn more about you or Align, where's the best place to reach them? You.
Absolutely. So you can reach out to us on alignednegotiation.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Aligned Negotiation. You can reach out to myself, Mark Mirra, or any of my colleagues at the firm. We would love to hear from you. We're on a mission to rebrand negotiation as something, although conflict rich, it can be collaborative. And we want to help people be clear, be assertive, and be nice twice because you shouldn't be nice all the time.
I love it. Well, thank you, Mark, for joining us today on this episode of The Modern Mind. It's been a total pleasure to have you.
Awesome. Had a blast. Can't wait for the next one.
Thanks.